For today's three-stock lunch, and we're looking at some big week-to-date winners to start the year. Costco higher by 7%, leading the S&P after those strong December sales numbers. Delta Airlines up 9% this week after a few upgrades and the announcement of free Wi-Fi, and perhaps some booking tailwinds from Southwest disaster. And finally, Freeport-MacMoRan, the copper miner, up 12% this week and 6% today on an analyst upgrade and rising commodity prices. To trade these names, let's bring in Boris Schlossberg of BK Asset Management, Managing Director and a CNBC contributor. Great to see you, Boris. Let's start with Costco. Do you like the stock here?
So 31 times earnings, definitely a little expensive at this point, but it is really the preeminent brand in the space. And I think, what this is the story of Costco is telling us. I think the middle income and the upper income American consumers kind of settled into this very comfortable two-way shopping behavior pattern where everyday goods are bought at Amazon and then you buy everything in bulk at Costco. And I think that behavior pattern is clearly being reflected in the sales of Costco at this point. Company is tremendously a great executor of talent. They basically have some of the best merchandising and selection out there. So to me, I think on a long-term basis, great compounding stock. They've increased their dividend 19 years in a row, going to increase it even more. It's not not a rich dividend, but it's all going to grow. And I think long term, it's just an amazingly good stock.
Well, let's move on to Delta Airlines.
So Delta is very interesting. Delta had a huge upward guidance. They literally doubled their fiscal 23 revenue, and they're going to have about $2 billion of free cash flow. I think it's just a strong testament to the fact that they are probably the leading brand in the space at this point. Certainly they have the best, the lowest cancellation time, very, very good brand image with the consumers. They probably are, like you said, going to get tremendous amount of flow from Southwest because of the Southwest disaster. And they're benefiting from this Frankensteinian new word called bleisure, the bleisure traveler, which is kind of like this traveler that combines both business and leisure at the same time. So I think despite the fact that ISM services today was very weak, it's not really showing up in the incomes of consumers. Travel demand still continues to stay strong, and the company is certainly the preeminent leader in its space. So you gotta like Delta at this point.
I can't resist that bleisure. I want to dwell on that for just a moment. But we have to move on to Freeport-MacMoRan. What's going on with the commodity space, Boris?
So, I mean, FCX is basically copper, and copper is the metal of the future. Copper is the metal of electricity, and electricity is the fuel of the future. Basically, if you believe that the EV market continues to take market share away from ICE, you need 2.5 times more copper for an electric vehicle than you do for an ICE vehicle. And that is why FCX, I think, continues to rise. Furthermore, on a much longer term basis, the market is projecting about a 50 million ton shortage of copper by 2030. There's just going to be way too little supply for the kind of demand that we have going forward. And by the way, it's not just EVs, it's also wind power and solar. All of that is, needed for copper. So it's just structurally a very, very strong secular bull story. It's going to have quite a lot of volatility because China, no China, recession, no recession. But long-term secularly, it's just, I think, a tremendously interesting story.
I only care if it's Dr. Copper as an indicator for us. If it's now a secular story, I'm not moving on. I'm going to find someone new.
Yeah. Good point.
There's also the dollar, Boris. How does that factor into everything here? And where do you see that going?
I think lower. I mean, I tweeted out today that the dollar is definitely going to get hurt on that ISM number, and it dropped about 150 pips against the yen after that. I am in the camp of Ron and Son, everybody else, that the Fed has got to stop. They have to stop for everybody's sake, and certainly for their own, if they don't want to drive us into the ground at this point. So I think the story is not going to be, we're going to cut rates, but I do think the story is going to be, we'll wait and see. And that story is going to come much sooner than the market expects, because at this point, there's literally zero reason for them to raise rates. Inflation is dead as far as I think any kind of a macro point is concerned. And wage pressures were relatively modest. Labor does not have, this is not 1970s, labor does not have the power to negotiate like they did in 1970s. Wage push inflation is a story of the past. So I hope he's not living the 70s, and I hope he comes to his senses. So if that's the case, dollar probably gets weaker from this point on.
Wow, a big hope to be sure, but that is the market debate in a nutshell right now. Boris, thanks so much.